Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I've decided to talk a little bit more about short Fat Otaku, who can't seem to avoid controversy these days, or more accurately putting his foot into his own mouth. Now, my last few videos have gone over a couple of instances of Dev being bad faith, and arguing very clear double standards, such as most notably him arguing that Biden and the FBI trying to steal an election is perfectly acceptable, and for the record, Dev did at the time admit that he believed that the FBI and Biden tried to do this, an especially odd double standard to have when Biden's actions that Dev admitted to would completely legitimize and justify even the most uncharitable interpretation of the Eastman memo that you could take. Needless to say, that particular thread has been quite the spicy meatball indeed. However, seemingly wanting to outdo himself, Dev has now resorted to trying to pull the whole both sides are equally bad routine when talking about the recent assassination attempt against Donald Trump. Because apparently, in the mind of short Fat Otaku, Donald J. Trump is as equally bad and as equally responsible for the assassination attempt against himself as the gunman who, only a few hours ago, literally tried to blow his brains out, and who has sadly managed to kill an innocent bystander, as well as wound a few others. But remember, Dev is arguing in completely good faith here, and if you dare question that in any way whatsoever, well, Dev is just going to label you a non-person and decree that your speech is simply not protected under the tenets of free speech. Unlike Dev, I have absolutely no qualms about allowing my political opposition to speak, even if they accuse me of being bad faith. Partially as a means to demonstrate this, and also partially as a means to delve further into the topic at hand, allow me to read to you all some of the various tweets that Dev has posted with regard to the Trump assassination attempt, so we can better see how far he is willing to argue that both sides are equally bad. As Dev begins by stating, quote, "So it's come out that the guy who shot Trump was a 20-year-old Republican voter, probably some schizo. If you continue to blame Biden or the Dems with no proof, you are a part of the problem. Stop being a partisan, start engaging your brain." I feel I should point out just how quickly Dev is wanting to state that the guy in question was Republican. You know, the same Dev who typically likes to sit it out and wait for the facts to come in properly. It would appear that Dev himself had a bit of an uneasy feeling with regards to this little tweet of his, and decided to create some insurance by stating, quote, "Oh, and if it comes out this is wrong and he was a Dem, you still shouldn't be a partisan. If all you do is react, then things will only escalate. Each and every single one of you fucking LARPers calling for a civil war these past 4 years have no idea what it means. Stop." Allow me to take a little break from reading Dev's tweets and explain something that he should know, but apparently either doesn't know or pretends not to know. That being that the typical rightoid position is not civil war good. Instead, a common position that a lot of people on the right have could be more accurately described as civil war is tragically inevitable at this point. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a number of reasons to believe that should a civil war break out, the right would ultimately be the ones that come out on top. Even then, you're still looking at a war that's going to last years and cost thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, or even millions of lives. And very, very few people want that. Since I do believe it is relevant, I will be explaining my own position on this very specific topic later on. But for the time being, let's get back to Dev's tweets. As Dev decides to also state, quote, "One side wants fair elections and a safe country. The other wants to eliminate their opponents to stay in power. Both sides view themselves and their opponents like this. If you cannot even accurately describe your opponent's desires, you need to shut up." To this tweet, I must ask, what if I can provide actual proof, though, that far leftists do indeed want to kill people that don't politically agree with them? Proof such as that one time, for example, a bunch of progressive college professors were tricked into celebrating a feminist rewrite of Mein Kampf. Or how about all of those progressives back in the day that were making hashtags such as kill all men? How about Antifa, whose membership have in the past murdered their political opponents with absolutely zero actual provocation? Or how about the time the mainstream media completely lost its shit over the mere phrase, "It's okay to be white"? What would Dev have to say to these factual and therefore accurate descriptions of the goals and desires of my political opposition on the far left? about. Something tells me that anyone who brings this up is simply going to be ignored by Dev. Moving on, it turns out that there was a little bit of a development in the story, as Dev decides to state, quote, "This identification looks more credible than the previous Antifa guy. My previous assertion stands. If you cannot stop your partisan brain thinking, you'll make this worse. Leftoids caused this by crying over Trump for years. Rightoids caused this by crying over Biden for years." So yes, there you go. Dev is unironically trying to pull the both sides are equally bad argument, in a situation where it appears very likely that a member of Antifa tried to assassinate Donald Trump, and somehow Donald Trump is equally bad to the Antifa guy that tried to assassinate him, and is somehow equally responsible for that. Also, I believe I should mention that Dev's earlier willingness to jump on the idea that the gunman was a Republican ultimately demonstrates that to him this was just an opportunity to try to pull a victory lap over the evil rightoids all over an assassination attempt. In other words, this is Dev's confirmation bias potentially coming back to bite him, all because he wants a very specific narrative and leapt at the opportunity for the gunman to be what was most politically convenient for him. For the record, it turns out that even assuming the first guy was the actual gunman, it wouldn't actually help Dev's narrative in the way that he thinks it would, as he later had to state, quote, "Option 1, shooter was Thomas Crooks, GOP voter but donated $15 to Act Blue, media FBI confirm it, but the corpse doesn't look like him and apparently his Twitter is active. Option 2, shooter was Maxwell Urich, Antifa goon with a rap sheet. Corpse looks like him, no confirmation." I should mention the reason the donation to Act Blue is important is because it would imply that Mr. Crooks is more likely than not a rhino. This is especially the case given that the nature of the primary elections in Pennsylvania require you to register as Republican to vote for the Republican primaries. In other words, it would be actually quite feasible indeed for a leftist to pretend to be Republican and register as a Republican in order to try to sabotage Trump because Trump is literally Hitler, don't you know? Dev follows on this particular tweet by stating, quote, "Urich has more motive and, by my untrained eye, looks more like the corpse pictures. Crooks is what the mainstream is going with, and FBI did DNA testing to confirm. Wait a day before staking out a strong claim either way." So says Dev, the individual who, I should remind you all, originally jumped at the opportunity to blame a Republican in order to try to get a victory lap on Republicans and try to blame them for it, instead of engaging his own brain like he suggested everyone else do. Moving on, Dev follows up by stating, quote, "And remember, no matter which way it goes, if you keep being a partisan, a populist, an extremist, a radical, this will only escalate. Don't cry when the civil war you've been fantasizing over kicks off and comes to your doorstep. You will have been the one to bring it there." And it is here that I believe we can find Dev's true motives for why he decides to argue in bad faith, especially more recently. He believes that trying to paint one side as worse than the other, even if it is factually accurate, will only lead to escalation and therefore a civil war. As a result, he has decided it would be far more effective to stick his head into the sand and pretend both sides are equally bad, in the hopes that saying it enough will somehow magically cause everyone to de-radicalize and come to the negotiation table. To which I have to say that not only is this an example of Dev being an idealist, living in his own personal fantasy land, but it's also downright counterproductive, and instead this behavior is more likely to cause a civil war than to prevent it at this stage. Consider for a moment that the extremists on the far left include people like Vosh, who admits that his only principle is to win. Consider, if you will, the mindset of such an individual if you tell him that both sides are equally bad. Vosh is going to take that as to mean that the far right are as every bit as fringe as he is, meaning that the general public is not going to side with them or defend them if Vosh decides to attack them physically. Also consider for a moment the far left's rise to power in the past wasn't due to the reaction of far-right extremists, but was instead due to people trying to be diplomatic towards them and have been far too willing to let far leftists get away with things. And by things, I mean actual acts of violence. In other words, the reason the far left became as powerful as they did wasn't due to an overreaction reaction, or a reaction at all from the far right, but ultimately, ironically enough, a lack of such a reaction. And it's also worth noting that people who spout the both sides are equally bad argument, the way that Dev does, are going to be seen as people who won't fight back until it's far too late. In other words, arguing that both sides are equally bad is only going to result in emboldening people like Vosh. And for this reason, arguing both sides are equally bad is only going to result in escalating and increasing the risk of civil war. I believe now is the perfect time to summarize my own thoughts on this matter, as I have also made some tweets with regards to this situation. In this case, for example, I stated, quote, "My position has been that a peaceful victory to the culture war is the ideal and should be sought if feasible. Failing that, efforts should be taken to ensure any civil war is as decisively in my favor as possible to minimize the cost in blood and time that would inevitably result. Both of those possible outcomes require the exact same tactics and strategy at this stage. The only way to possibly get the far left to back down is to make them view their situation as beyond hopeless, especially if they choose to escalate further. We must break their spirit if we are to prevent a war, and a great part of that is turning as much of the general public as possible against them." I also stated elsewhere, quote, "Shouting both sides are equally bad only serves to embolden those whose only principle is to win, as they will see it as a confirmation their true enemies are equally fringe and that the majority won't choose to fight them. It thus increases the chance of civil war." In other words, my position is very much one of hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I believe I've summarized all that really needs to be said here, so I'll finish by stating that of course links will be left in the description below to the tweets that I've shown, so you can check them out for yourself if you should so desire. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.